Well, hello. It's Console Wednesday. We got a great group of people here, users and or company people from Solid State Logic, and we're going to be diving into this console. I know you can't see a console on the screen there, but it actually really does exist. I'm going to pass to who's going to present first. I forget.
Steve.
Steve, I'm going to pass this over to Steve.
Well, why don't we introduce ourselves first?
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's fine, but I have to pass it to Steve anyway. And Mac, why don't you go ahead with your question bit?
Oh, all right, that. As I'm sure all of you know, we encourage questions, and in your GoToWebinar control panel, there's a little pull-down menu that says questions. Type your questions in and submit them. Please be specific in your questions because they are unlikely to be answered the moment we see them. And a couple of minutes later, they may be out of context and we won't understand what you're talking about. So try to be specific. And the same thing if you make comments, general comments, please be specific what it's about. We will try to get to every question, certainly every topic. If we don't answer your question directly, don't feel left out as long as we get to your topic. And with that, I think we should introduce ourselves. Oh, and look at Pete holding up our little tease to try to attract patrons. Patrons on Patreon is our Practical Show Tech hand sanitizer, which you will get for being a patron. I have a whole box of them here in my house waiting to be sent out. So Phil, would you like to introduce your team and Michael and Kenny and?
Sure. Thank you, Mac and Peter, for allowing us to present today and to come on with our esteemed guests. I'll introduce myself first. My name is Phil Wagner. I'm Senior Vice President of Solid State Logic, and I've been around this console thing for since the 80s, and I spent a very long time with SSL in the 90s into the early 2000s when Peter Gabriel bought the company. And then went away to Focusrite and a couple others, came back just this year, and very proud of the System T technology. And we're very thankful that we have an opportunity to tell you highlights of it today. Steve Zaretsky is our Vice President responsible for broadcast sales, and Thomas Jensen, Vice President responsible for technical operations. And they're very well versed in the console, the System T, and our long history in both live consoles and broadcast consoles. And we're very fortunate today to have with us the inimitable Michael Abbott, who's got a very impressive CV, as they say in England. He's production mixer for The Voice, audio coordinator for the Grammys, amongst a number of other things that he does. So thank you, Michael, for joining us today. You'll tell us a little bit more about yourself in just a moment. Kenny Kaiser, who is front of house mixer. We first met a number of years ago when he was with the Killers, and he does a number of other bands that he'll tell you more about as well. And both Michael and Kenny have a lot of experience with network audio, and we're going to talk about some production technologies that are very exciting. So I guess it's over to you, Steve, or do you guys want to introduce yourself, say hello at all? Kenny, Michael?
Well, we can do it later.
Great.
Let's knock into this.
Great.
Yeah. Well, regrettably, this is Steve Zaretsky talking. We've spent about 40 minutes trying to get web cameras working, and unfortunately, I am visually handicapped here. But for those of you who know me well, you're not missing out on anything by me not being on camera. The presentation is really what this is all about. So we'll start here, get this going. So thanks everybody for joining. Today's topic is kind of advanced audio production in an audio over IP world. So that's a lot of what we're going to focus on, is just sort of network audio and how the broadcast industry and the live production industry are merging together with this new technology, which is, again, part of with Michael and Kenny. We're going to dive into this pretty deeply. So SSL is very pleased to have basically a range of products, System T and SSL Live, which are basically an IP platform utilizing audio over IP and the ability to have shared resources between both front of house and production is a kind of a unique capability that we have, and basically giving the proper tools to the proper application, but yet removing a lot of the barriers that have been there with splitters and all the challenges that people deal with working in live production and broadcasts on the same kind of shows. So the Tempest platform is the common denominator between these two consoles. So the T in System T is actually where we derived that from the Tempest platform. And that is the proprietary engine, that is the horsepower behind both consoles in terms of audio processing. Our CTO, Enrique Perez, wrote this white paper a few years ago when we first introduced the Tempest engine. The live consoles were actually the first adoption of the Tempest engine platform, which is a multi-core engine, not relying on any DSP or FPGA chips. So in essence, the console is running as software, and it provides us with a tremendous amount of flexibility and horsepower, both from a development standpoint and also the flexibility of the console from resources in terms of busing and inputs and outputs and formats. It's quite unique in the flexibility that System T has. And this white paper can be downloaded off our website if you want to read more details about what that means. The live console, as I mentioned, was the first range of consoles to deploy the Tempest engine. In the live consoles, the engines are actually inside the surface, which is very common for live consoles. Take it out of a road case, put it up on a table, plug in your I/O, and you're ready to rock. We have now a full range of live consoles from the L100 all the way up to the L550 with different ranges of capabilities and processing power. System T also has a full range of surfaces. The S500 is the large format surface, which can go up to 96 faders. On the right-hand side, we have the S300, which goes from 16 to 48 faders, and even the Tempest control rack in the middle, the TCR, is actually a control surface for a System T engine that doesn't require any control surface, purely a touchscreen driven interface. We also have our T-Salsa application, which is a remote offline online, and we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So System T, basically from the broadcast side, is processing engines and surfaces and I/O devices. It's a large format capability, so lots of channels, lots of I/O, and a complete IP architecture. So everything is a network-based device. Everything is connected via standard network topology, Cat6 cabling, and standard off-the-shelf switches. So control surfaces handle all the mixing and routing, obviously faders and knobs and so forth, and metering. The engine has all the processing, EQ, and level controls, and is the gateway between the surface and the I/O network. System T is the first native Dante console on the market. We're going to talk a lot about Dante, but the I/O backbone of System T is full immersed Dante, and all of our I/O devices also speak Dante. But you can utilize any manufacturer's Dante devices with System T. So our wireless mic systems, intercoms, etc. The Tempest engine is a true 64-bit operation, our real-time patented OS. There's audio processing on every path, so inputs and outputs have EQ and dynamics, insert, delay. We also have an onboard effects engine, again from the live console, which has reverb and delays, all the things that someone like Kenny would deploy on doing live production for a music act. This is actually incorporated into the broadcast console with some additional capabilities, which Thomas is going to delve into in a minute. The neat thing about this is that both System T and the live consoles both talk Dante, and so all I/O resources can be shared between System T and live. So again, mic preamps can be shared between the live front of house console and the production console. And both consoles have online, offline setup software, so you can access the console online through network connections, or you can use the setup software offline to build show files, from your home, save that onto a USB stick, load it on the console when you get to the venue or when you get into the studio, and the console will be fully configured. Tempest engine for system T has two sizes. The T80 is 800 paths. The T25 is 256 paths with full auto mixing, configurable output buses. The Live series has various configurations within the models. So there's the L100 being the 96 channel and the L550 being 288 processing paths. So that's kind of a difference between the two versions, since one has the engine external and the other is internal. This is kind of the path of the system T console. We have lots of processing on everything: EQ, dynamics, insert, filters, and a variety of output bus types, masters, groups, auxes, mix minus, track buses, all configurable. So on the Tempest engine software, you can actually go in and just type in the type of configuration you need, how many channels, how many outputs, are they mono, are they stereo. System T now supports immersive audio up to 7.1.4 as well. And you can basically build the console that you need for that particular show. You can actually even add resources on the fly without having to reboot the console. So you can literally change the configuration of the console on the fly basis. So here you can see the different I/O ranges. The live console started out as a MADI console. So we do have a full range of MADI stage boxes, but then on the left are all the Dante I/O stage boxes. And as I said, both System T and Live can share resources across both platforms. So in a multi-room facility or in a multi-production, basically front of house console can be shared with broadcast production, with other control rooms, everything on the same network topology, sharing I/O, sharing engines, accessibility through remote software like the T-Salsa application to get online to the consoles from remote locations as well. Built into the consoles, we have extensive auto mix capabilities. The System T80 engine can provide up to 400 auto mix paths. We have up to 8 auto mix groups. So lots of flexibility in terms of auto mixing and lots of refinement. SSL has been doing auto mixing since the mid 2000s, like 2005, 2006, when we introduced auto mixing into some of our earlier consoles. So System T and Live just share kind of that expanded knowledge base for auto mixing. We also have de-essing on System T, which is pretty unique to have that built into the dynamics path, which is a kind of a cool feature to have de-essing as well as compressor, limiter, expander, and gates. System T also, as I mentioned, has an extensive effects rack. So in addition to having things like reverbs and delays and kind of the music production oriented effects, the System T, being a broadcast console, also has loudness metering, a phase scope, denoising, lots of different types of processing capabilities more specific to broadcast. And these are SSL plugins as well that we keep expanding those and adding them as we go along. And actually, one of the most recent plugins that we added to the console was this 360 transcoder for the Sennheiser Ambio microphone. And that Ambio mic actually is something that we can decode within System T for full immersive audio. And with that, I'm going to hand this off now to Thomas Jensen, who is going to now take control and kind of talk a bit about immersive audio. So
great.
Stop sharing, I guess. Are you now taking control, Tom? So you have it?
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, Pete just switched him over so that Thomas is now the presenter and he can share his screen.
Let me just make sure we're seeing the right one.
We're seeing 4 green faders, 2 green faders, 2 blue faders, and 3 red faders.
All right, so you're seeing my main screen here. Okay. Hey everyone. As mentioned, my name is Thomas Jensen. I'm the head of the support systems and support team here in the US as part of the New York side, and we deal with all of the installs, the commissionings, the training, and all of the sort of technical aspects of the of all our clients' needs here in the US. So I'm going to do a very quick introduction to System T, and I'm actually running the piece of software that Steve was talking about earlier, which is the T-Salsa. So I'm just running it on my laptop here, and I'm able to interact with the console as if I was sitting in front of one, just without the physical hardware controls, and because I'm offline, not an actual audio console, but in terms of control, I can set up and manipulate everything. So I'll have a quick look at what makes System T very powerful, using it as a tool for immersive sound. And I think that the first thing that is important here is that as Steve was mentioning, we can format any channel or any bus from mono, stereo, through to 5.1 channels, all the way up to 7.1.4, which means that the actual audio input of a single channel and a single fader is essentially a 7.1.4 input of 5.1.4. And on the output side as well, whether we're looking at our stems or what do you think of audio subgroups, or your actual program outs can be 5.1, 7.1, 7.1.4, 5.1.4, any kind of format that you want. So that truly allows you to pass audio from an input through to the output of the console completely unaltered. So in the case of a 7.1.4 channel, we're able to feed it through to a 7.1.4 output natively. Or if we are feeding a 7.1.4 channel to a 5.1 output, the console will do the automatic down mixing within the bus architecture to accomplish that. So within the channels and within the output buses, we have a number of features that we would need here. So if we expand the view of, say, a mono channel, the input section of the mono channel, all it really gives us is a trim to adjust the audio level coming in as we're dealing with a single audio source. But if we click on a stereo channel, we'll see that the system enhances the input capability, where we can balance between the left and the right side. We can mono left, mono right, and we can introduce an MS decode so that we can decode that. Going to a 5.1 channel, we now see that we actually have the ability to adjust the input level of the various components of 5.1, the front, center, the right, the left, the right surrounds, and the LFE. And we actually have the ability to reorder the incoming signal so that it matches our format. So, and if we keep going through and we look at 7.1.4, we now have the ability to make tweaks. So that allows us on a channel by channel basis to condition the audio signal as it comes into the channel before we pass it through to our main program output. On the output side of the channel, if we start off with a mono channel again, we have essentially our panning section. So if we click on our panning section here, this little area on the screen will show us our panning function. And as a panning representation of a mono signal, we have a single mono dot here, which represents the mono signal's audio position within the XY of the audio. So if you're feeding a 5.1 bus, essentially this will become your position within the 5.1 or within the left and right surround and center and left and right. If you're feeding the channel through to a 5.1.4 or 7.1.4, you also activate the XZ panner, which allows us to manipulate the audio up and down within the audio field. So essentially, we can now position our mono source directly where we want it in the full immersive space. If we move on to a stereo channel, the default for a stereo channel is that it's fully width. So the panning law is basically pan hard left and hard right. So we can now manipulate the stereo signal within front to rear and bottom to top. We can narrow the width of that, and now we can actually position it within the 3D space manually. If we just jump up to a 7.1, let's do this one. So here's a 5.1 signal. The 5.1 signal is pan hard left, hard right, center, and surrounds. But we can now move it up and down within the height space. If we narrow the depth and we narrow the width, we can now compact the 5.1 signal and rearrange it within the 3D space again. So any of these bus formats will assign a panel that matches the output format. One of the things that we've introduced, which I had shown here on this channel, is we have something that we call Theater Pan, which is actually something that we've had for quite a long time in our original digital consoles, but it allows you to visualize your signal within the 3D space as a circular pan that allows you to position the signal around and allows you to narrow the height within the sphere and move it up and down, which gives you a different way of panning within the 3D space rather than thinking about it as a single point source that's moving around. So these pan laws are available on all the different channels, and that basically allows us to pass audio from any of these channels, building up a full 7.1.4 immersive output, which can feed your master output, it feeds your monitoring, etc. So that's discrete sources, so you can bring in mono microphones, stereo microphones, you can bring back full playback machines, whether they're 5.1 or all the way up to immersive playback machines, and pass them through and build up your space. We have a couple of plugins, as Steve was mentioning. So within the system, we have this effects rack. The effects rack is essentially a bunch of slots that allow you to populate them with plugins of any format. So you would pick a plugin format that matches your output desired path function. So if we go to 5.1.4, we can now pick between tools like EQ, dynamics, etc. But we also have this new plugin here, as Steve mentions, which is our 360 transcoder. So I've now created an instance of that. I already have a few instances. This instance is now available to be assigned to a given channel. So the transcoder essentially allows us to pick an A, a B, or a Sennheiser Ambio mic, so ambisonic 4-channel output microphone, as a source to the plugin. And then through these controls, we're able to convert that into a 5.1.4 or 7.1.4 positioned audio output. We have tools like rotating the microphone, inverting it, moving it on its axis. Here is an input key that shows us what the actual audio sources from the mic needs to be assigned to on a given channel. It also gives us the ability to control the zooming, and we also have controls of height and sort of viewing angle or listening angle, and we have the ability to adjust the balance of the high frequency. We can bring everything in phase, which removes that. If we enable center, we will introduce this plugin, the output into the center channel, but if we don't do that, we will carve out the center channel for announcers. So essentially this plugin is now available to be inserted on channel. One of the other plugins that we do is kind of the opposite, which is an interesting thing. We've created a binaural 3D encoder, which actually allows us again to take a multi-formatted input, 5.1.4, and we basically binaurally encode it to a stereo output, which would be encoded so that if you listen to it through stereo headphones, you will get the immersive sound experience through the headphones. And that plugin is also available and can be used in multiple instances. So once you've created a plugin, essentially what we do is we would go back to our channel view here, and on a channel, for instance, this 5.1.4 channel, we would then insert the plugin so that we can just grab it and make adjustments. And that allows us to bring in a number of ambisonic mics from within an arena or any type of environment and decode it into that channel and bring it through to a 5.1.4 output as true immersive. So that, unless there were any questions that came up through the chat, I will hand back control.
Thank you, Thomas. Let me say, first of all, I overlooked Mac Kerr, our host, and Mac is a mixer in his own right and working currently at Goldman Sachs on a System T, it's worth mentioning. And we'll get into his experiences in a little bit. And Kenny and Michael have worked together on various jobs I'll tell you about that included System T. And Kenny works on our live consoles. And I think it's worth pointing out that, you know, the sophistication you see in the surround capacity on the System T doesn't happen by accident. The technologies for post-production that SSL have been providing go back decades. And when you worked with film mixers in both dubbing departments of the studio lots and in the scoring department as we have, you really understand the sophistication of what those you know, blockbuster feature film mixers require. And when you serve that industry, you build it into your product. So we've had a long heritage going back to the earliest days of Skywalker Sound, dealing with, for example, split surrounds before it was even called 5.1. All that brain trust goes into our product. Another point is on the Dante, where, as Steve mentioned, we're native Dante on the System T, and we're leading the transition from MADI to Dante. SSL was involved with the development MADI back in the 80s, and at this point, it is 34-year-old technology. And Dante, which is relatively new at 10 years, is just really starting to get fully immersed in live and installed, and certainly in broadcast and to a lesser degree recording. But a lot of broadcast production is using Dante. But both the live console and the System T support Dante. And part of that, particularly when dealing with one of Thomas's area of expertise, dealing with SMPTE 2110, the new ratified standard for broadcast IP, audio and video. SSL System T will deal with the AS67 flows from Dante and the SMPTE 2110 through the Dante domain manager, which we control directly from the console. And then similar to that, we also would control directly from the live console Dante domain manager. So there's a lot of hooks from an IP base that go into the products. One thing we'll talk about as well is the Src Bridge, which allows you to bridge a high quantity of signals, say 256 channels. It's part of the System T. And for example, if you wanted to work in 96K in live, but you're feeding broadcast at 48K, we make a device that allows you to have 226 channels, 228 channels on either end. And you can have separate subnets on either side, separate sync and separate sample frequency. And that's a device that we provide uniquely that allows the future of this show technology to occur very elegantly. So I'll stop talking. There is a question, Thomas, for you about this bridge device I just mentioned. How are the channel names managed? If a broadcast truck wants to connect to a venue, the venue has their names and their domain. It's not just 1, 2, 3.
Right. Well, so if we're talking about a Dante connection on both ends, essentially the SRC Bridge presents itself as has two separate Dante devices. So there'll be a Dante device that will show up on the venue side, and that Dante device is named and gets the IP scope and clocking scope of the venue, and then you can actually name every single channel within the device. From 1 to 256 for the SRC version. Likewise, within the, let's say, the truck or the other side of the bridge, that itself will present itself as another Dante device, which can be labeled, given a name, and then it can be has similar names. So typically, what would happen is, depending on the length of deployment, you can either think of it as tie lines that basically you just say, you know, I'm going to feed you mic 1 on tie line 1, and then it's 1 on the other side of the bridge. Or if it's something that's going to be set up for a while, you can go in and label, you know, label the actual channels, what they are, as send and returns.
Great, thank you, Thomas. Another question, how much time does it take for processing 5.1 in Ambio? 5.1 and all the surround formats are real-time processes within the real-time engine of the SSL consoles. Thomas, is there any processing time for Ambio?
There will be a small delay. I haven't looked at the actual samples, but most of our plugins, we're talking about samples here, not milliseconds.
Great. Well, we have done a great job of saying.
Sorry, just as a clarification, the entire processing path of System T, so that includes a full dynamics, two dynamic sections, all the way through to the main output, is about 8 samples.
Yeah, very powerful. Thank you. And that's a proprietary engine that's patented, actually. And that engine, as Steve mentioned, is both on the System T and the Live. So here we are, half an hour in, perfectly on time. We want to transition over to our incredible guests here. So Michael, your name ends in A. You're first up. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the 20 minutes we've allotted for you, and some of the things that you see in current production requirements and how they're being well served with new technologies for now and the future.
Thank you, Phil. As you mentioned, yes, I'm the production mixer for The Voice on NBC. We've been going for 10 years now. We're just about to enter into our 19th season at the NBC lot for the next iteration, the blinds as we call it. I also have been involved in the Grammys in various capacities for over 30 years. And that's one of the shows I take pride with. I think in the 30 years I've been involved, we've been nominated over 20 times for Emmys. In the past 15, 16 years, I think we've won 10 times. So it speaks volumes of the crew and the people that are involved and what they bring to the table with their passion, of which, you know, all of us involved in audio have to have a certain level of passion. The current situation that we find ourselves in, you know, as of about March, we were talking yesterday, everything was going just fabulous. We're all busier than we could ever be, planned to be, wanted to be. And it has changed our world significantly in terms of workflows with the various people. We're now starting to merge, at least here in Los Angeles, for television and broadcast back into production. And that in itself is presenting a lot of challenges. Phil and I have been working with a couple different entities with developing remote mixing, and that presents its own challenges. You know, where you're having your IO, where your control platform is, do you have a dirty internet? Do you have connectivity via dedicated point-to-point fiber? Is it a VPN porting with Unity Connect being utilized? It's all over the place. There are people popping up in Los Angeles say they can do this and they can do that. And at the end of the day, it really requires some engineering on the behalf of a lot of people to figure out all the latency management, the connectivity, the bandwidth. We just finished the live show of The Voice where we did 26 remotes nightly on a Monday and Tuesday night with contestants all over the country utilizing Skype as the platform. And purely put, we were at the mercy of the bandwidth of the individual end users. There's no way to manage that. We had a company that was going out and vetting the bandwidth and the connectivity. We kept on giving them instructions on how to go about this. No video game playing in the background, no Wi-Fi, direct to the router, on and on and on. We had it was mixed results. Personally, I get a cold chill when somebody mentions Skype. To me, it's not the platform for broadcast television. We're now entering into another phase of the show where we need live audience engagement, because for these shows, 75% of the shows I'm involved with are live with audience. And now we don't have audience to create that energy that comes with it. We entered into discussions in the past few weeks of having a remote audience at a third location off-site, because there's limitations, period, of how many people we can have on the lot. We typically on a show, we have 400 people working on the show on the lot. Now we're getting wrangled down to 100 plus or minus. So the audience is a factor that we've been trying to come up with a concept how to do it. We had a very interesting process where they were going to be sitting on each side of the the set coming on a video screens, and the perspective, they'd be looking over their shoulder left and right respectively when the artist is playing on the stage. And then another camera where they'd just be looking straight forward, trying to really emulate them being involved. We're now looking at a company that's did the same process for the NFL draft with the team play. And that seems promising. So just alone in that factor, you know, getting all the people on the same page to come up with these new workflows is very interesting, but time consuming, all consuming. And I'm blessed to be involved in that aspect. I've been talking to a lot of different console manufacturers in addition to SSL, and they all have in place remote mixing capabilities, but it's interesting that some of them have 32 by 32 channel limitations, which was kind of surprising for one manufacturer. Another one is set up in its topography and its architectural build out to do this do control from one platform to another platform via dirty internet at a bare minimum. Another part of their workflow would have direct connectivity via point-to-point fiber, which is really only in the case of a high-profile show. The average user, you know, recording studio to somebody's home can't create that kind of emulation. And again, for that scenario, you'd have I/O local at the site where you're doing the recording from, and the mixing would be at another location, and you'd be able to have the audio flow back and forth along with the data control. It's interesting what the variance is, and until this situation, the pandemic came up, in America, it really wasn't being addressed. In Europe, this seems to be the status quo. I know that they do a lot of the English and German soccer football via this with OB units remoted, and it goes back to, in the case in Germany, to a central location in Munich, I believe. And in England, I think the Premier League is doing the same thing. But in the US, until this came about, nobody's been thinking about it. Now everybody's looking at going remote in suites, so to speak, off-site to enable the headcount at location to be diminished. And I don't see that changing for the next year and a half. And after we come out of this, it may become the status quo. It's an unknown. It's amongst the unknowns of the unknowns we have at this time. The Grammys, we're in the first year of a 3-year phase of Dante implementation, which is something all of us in the engineering, audio engineering department wanted to do. This year we did the implementation of all the RF microphones onto a Dante platform for distribution, thusly eliminating 7 to 8 audio analog splits going to the various mix platforms. The net effect of that was amazing, and in terms of in the house PA, the high frequency that was brought into the room on these microphones, the resolution, we had to start shelving that high frequency because we never had that before. In the broadcast trucks, the music mixers said that they were carving less out in the 300-400 range because the clarity of the signal. I think this is all in part due to the elimination of the transformers, obviously. The next phase was to get all the mixers onto a common head amp and insert that into a Dante platform for distribution. Again, process to eliminate all the multiple splits that we have. We've got 2 full back positions. You have a picture?
Yes, you can pick up my screen, Mac. Can anyone see that?
Not yet.
Oh, do I share screen? Hold on a second. Show my screen. Yeah, there we go. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
That's backstage split world.
Right next to you.
So what you got on the left-hand side is the Audio Tech proprietary W4 transformers. They use a Cinelux isolation transformer. It's a 4-way transformer split. In each of those ATA racks is either a musical split, stage A, stage B, production mics, playback tracks, and then high levels. In the middle there, you'll see the Denali NEP CalRec head amps, the Hydra boxes. And then on the extreme right is the Dante network distribution scheme, which we were using a lot of the Focusrite D64s to demux it back to a MADI stream, which is what the trucks were taking. So in a sense, it wasn't a fully native Dante platform, but the challenge we have is a lot of the mixed platforms we have are not Dante based, unlike the SSL console. So we still had to feed stuff, signals out via fiber, MADI, and then reconvert at the local trucks. The first phase was the microphones, second phase was the instrumentation, and therein lies a bigger problem with all the mixers that we work with. Everybody has got vested interest, both financially and engineering-wise, into different types of console platforms. Music Mix Mobile is Lavo-based, Denali NEP is CalRec-based, front of house and foldback are Digico-based. So the challenges are to get everybody to agree to head amps, and we were talking about this yesterday with Kenny. The discipline to do this has to be that everybody agrees on a common gain setting, and it would go back to what we used to do is have one guy managing all the mic preamps for M3. This flow, as I call it, would require a single person managing all the single type of head amp and then distributing that into a Dante network. Again, still back into a MADI stream up to the trucks because that's the transport protocol they subscribe to right now. The third phase was going down the road of immersion or immersive mixing, Atmos at this time, and the realization for the amount of paths we need for immersive mixing with 2 music mix trucks and a production truck is we're looking at roughly each platform having 64 tracks of audio. And what we would do is you'd break it up into components: dialogue, audience reaction, playback clips, music mix left and right. And within that music mix, you would have your various beds of 7.1.4 immersive mix. Eric Schilling, one of the 2 music mixers, has been going deep on this, taking show mixes from artists that we've done and recorded and doing proto demos for proof of performance. And this was leading up to 2 years from now to hopefully we have an outlet that would support a play out of immersive on a streaming service with our network partner CBS, which currently they don't have. The networks, as we discussed yesterday, I don't see that. I don't envision that transferring in the near future. I know there's shadow or background immersive sports programming going on that are broadcast in a localized market, say Phoenix, talking to the Fox Sports mixers, and it just isn't mainstream at this point. So to get my clients and the producers to find the cost for this, to approve the cost, it's kind of a challenge in itself because everything has a value when I take it to the table.
One of the things, Michael, you mentioned with gain sharing, I think as a transition to talk to Kenny here, one of the ways that SSL does that with the Dante stage boxes is to have, I think gain sharing has gotten a bad name over the 20 years it's been around. One of which is there's been a high resolution, poor resolution between the controls. And we've taken the technology into the stage boxes from our 9000 series console developed in the 90s. We use an MDAC gain element that has 16,000 steps in it. And that has 60 dB of attenuation. So you get a very powerful gain sharing environment, which is invisible to the gain compensated output is invisible to the secondary operators. Plus, if it's on Dante, it can be split as many ways as it needs to be with its own separate Dante chip for that purpose that can be put on a separate subnet and separate with separate sync and so on. So there's some pretty powerful ideas that can be looked at down the road for incorporating our technology or anyone's technology.
That's a very good point. One thing you left out is that with these head amps, the amount of headroom that we have is phenomenal. You know, without getting into signal to noise factors. Excuse me. And that's from an experience where on the lives, I was in a Lavo platform taking MADI streams from a CalRack hub, broadcast hub that was feeding me all the remotes. And the engineer Hugh Healy and NEP and we came up with a noise floor, a setting on his feeds to me through that console. And as I needed, I had my gain adjustments. So, I mean, that's a form of gain sharing. It's latent that it's just one person, but the fact of the matter, it's along those lines. And I think it takes a discipline, but now, as you mentioned, with SSL's gain sharing, I think it's, you know, nobody wants to go out and get 12 head amp cages for 2 consoles. The cost differential, I know Kenny mentions that. It's just, you don't need it. What you need is the people that buy into it and are enabling that function.
And as we're going to be forced to economize in certain ways in all areas of entertainment and sports production, I think there's going to be some reality checks that will force us to adopt new technologies where maybe that wasn't as necessary in the past.
Very much so. Cost is going to be a big component going forward.
Exactly. Cost and flexibility will drive technological adoption. Michael, you have a question. Are you talking about multi-channel streaming or just standard stereo and the possible partnership with CBS?
Well, CBS as our network broadcast partner is capable of 5.1, which is what we've been doing. I think we were the first award show. You said it was 15 years ago. It was many years ago when we launched that, or maybe Matt said that, but regardless, that was a 2.5 year process of vetting proof of concept and performance before we aired a live show in 5.1. Because in our case, we have very little room of failure in the audio realm. So in the same thing, I don't see CBS or any of the networks that are land-based tertiary to be broadcasting anything but 5.1, because as I mentioned last night, most of the execs, tech managers in those networks are still having nightmares of the implementation HD 5.1. So streaming, as we see NBC started up their Peacock network, CBS has got all access, but it's stereo, which really surprised me when I did all my research on these entities. Live streaming it's doable with some of the streamers. Netflix, they can't do live streaming because they have deliverables to over 68 different countries, and all the metadata that they have to put in and insert to all those streams. They can't do a live show.
They are leading, all the streaming services are leading on Atmos implementation for dead program material.
Actually, Netflix and Amazon, I think, have multiple deliverables where they can do from DTS and or Atmos. And I'm not up to speed on that.
Yeah, Netflix have to do 50 different streams for various formats around the world, formats and languages.
Yeah.
With that, why don't we, Michael, is there something else you want to mention? I'm sorry.
No, I'm good.
Great. Well, thank you very much. That was very informative. And Kenny, talk to us a little bit about your background and where you see the state of the industry and technology in the future, present and future.
Yeah, I mean, I started out as a system tech and then started working in as a engineer, mixing, all that good stuff. Been working with the Killer, Sammy Hagar, Train, Bush, the list goes on over the years. Basically, I stepped into the SSL route and found out that they started implementing the Dante stuff. And obviously, me and Phil have a relationship from back when Phil was over at Focusrite. We're dealing with Focusrite stuff with the Killers in the early days, and it just progressed from there. as far as what I see in the future with this stuff, I mean, like we said again, everything's going to be cost based, right? Like there was an article I read in Rolling Stones that Live Nation is asking artists to take a pay cut next year.
Yeah.
For all the festivals and stuff. Well, I mean, that's a pay cut, so production's going to go down. It's either that or our rates are going to go down. Which, I mean, everyone else has a mortgage. I got a mortgage. I don't know if that's going to happen. So we got to find ways to cut costs. Years ago, I was fortunate enough to go out with Jim James, the solo acoustic. It was me and Monitor Guy. We never worked together before, but it was a small package tour. So it was basically a trailer behind a bus, band and crew on the same bus. We were talking about packaging. I was on an L300 in front of house. He was on an L200 at Monitor World. We're going to have a whole split and all that stuff, but we actually decided to use the Dante box. We got a demo from Spectrum Audio, got to be able to use that, and it was fantastic. Like Mike said before, with the Killers, we've been sharing stage racks. We've been Matty-based stage racks for probably about 4 years now, me and Marty. But we have a really good relationship, and we know how to talk, and we have a communication about where we would like our head amps to go and everything like that. I feel that this new Dante aspect of having two separate chips, where you have two people being able to control the gain on there, is a game changer. It's going to open up a lot of doors, I think, and people are going to have to rethink how we implement the packaging. Because I mean, we have had 2-way and 3-way and 5-way splits for how long now? Active, passive, you know. It's something. W4, Ramtech, APM, or AMP connectors. I mean, there's better things out there now. We just got, and I think now with networks. The way, and networks. But yeah, so I think now is going to be definitely one of those things where people should start thinking about, maybe I don't need this 6 to 12U split. I can reuse the space somewhere else, you know, and try to figure that out. Because it's going to be a very cost-effective future, if you will. So
I think people need to know the architecture with the redundant capacity of the Dante networks, that the architecture is such that it can provide you with a level of reliability and functionality and enough that you can rely on. I mean, I think if there's one thing that's pretty common these days is that most tours are using Dante for drive lines and with analog as a backup. Some of the things that we've been envisioning is using Dante as your primary and secondary source, and then having Matty as a backup. But the flexibility and functionality of advantages of Dante as a bedrock platform for routing massive amounts of audio signals for as far as the eye can see is there. At the same time, people want the confidence to back up to something that they're maybe more tried and true.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's bad demos, right? You get a new product comes out, you hear all the horror stories, like this console broke down, or this console killed audio in the middle of the show, or this speaker pin breaks at, you know, fourth load or whatever you have. So and people just hold on to those bad experiences, and it's just, we need to have an open mind about this type of stuff. I mean, last summer was the last time. Last summer, I actually got to a festival. Usually it's analog or AES into the system, right? All guest consoles, analog or AES. I actually was somewhere in Sweden. They had a Dante option. Like, why not? Why not? It just makes perfect sense to me.
A great example is ATK, for example, who rolled out Dante for the halftime show, because that's the only way they can, not the only way, the best way they can do it today. And they're feeding, you know, how many millions of people. So there's great confidence at very high levels with this stuff. Thomas is involved with networks who are establishing their the network operations, their broadcast platforms on Dante and AS67. So it's happening now. I think we'll go more over to Mac now. Mac, tell us a little bit about your background, your current role, and where you see the future.
Well, my background, I started off in the early 70s in theater, and in the early mid 80s, I started doing mostly corporate events, and that's what I have mostly been doing until very recently. And I hate to admit it, but as everyone lost their jobs in this COVID pandemic, I started working like crazy because I had a client that I did shows for, a major financial institution with offices in 46 countries, who would fly executives around the world to have meetings, and suddenly they couldn't do that anymore. And now we do meetings. I used to do their meetings 2 days a month. Now I do their meetings 5 days a week, and we live with Zoom. We don't love Zoom, but we live with Zoom. It's as I think Michael said earlier, we have no control over the other end. The remote end, we can give them instructions on what to do, and we can hope they do that. But in the end, they're going to be on crappy Wi-Fi, and their dog is going to bark, and they're going to not like their house, or they're going to put up a virtual background on Zoom, which is a horror show. The best thing about Zoom is virtual backgrounds because you can play with them. The worst thing about Zoom is virtual backgrounds because they're hideous and your hair keeps coming. Well, my hair doesn't keep coming because it's never there, but we have an executive who's fusses with her hair the whole time, and she reaches up and her hair goes boom, and her arm disappears. I mean, come on, it's terrible. But that aside, working on their shows, actually, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, you said Dante is 10 years old. Well, then it would have been 12 years ago. The vendor who would supply the equipment for us when we were doing the fly packs brought in a network audio interface from Telos called Axia. They were the first, I think the first network audio distribution system. Was a lot of installations in radio stations. I think at that time they were saying they had 10,000 live wire installations. This was 2 years before Dante was introduced. And when this was presented to me as a way we were going to route to difficult, we were going into office buildings, and we sometimes had to run cables underneath computer floors. Pulling cables was a real pain, and so he found this, and we said, well, we'll just pull Cat5 once and leave it there. And if we don't come back this building, we walk away from it, because who cares? It's Cat5. And so we tried it, and I was a little apprehensive about it. But after having used it once, I was completely sold that why would we ever do anything not like this? That the fact that suddenly we had every input into the system available at every location. There was, you could route anything anywhere, and that became just unbelievable. And we did it without ground loops. It's all Ethernet has transformers built into it. Everything's transformer isolated or glass isolated just by the nature of the hardware you're using. It's completely isolated, and hums and buzzes are a thing of the past, and the distribution is fantastic. Then Dante came along, and it really caught on in the live world, and I laud all of those manufacturers who jumped on early because and got into the pool to see how it was, because I think it's the way we're going to do things in the future. But so currently we're not doing fly packs anymore. The company built a new world headquarters. They built a whole television facility. We have a control room that was built dedicated just to do this one show we were doing, the monthly partners meeting. It was fairly compact. I mean, the monitor wall's probably 35, 40 feet wide, but it's a shallow control room. And we had a Yamaha DM2000 as a console, which was, we had sort of spec'd when the building was designed 2 years before we ever got into it. And by the time we got into it, it was DM2000 was already getting a little long in the tooth because technology moves on. And we had it until we had that 10 years that console was sitting there, and we used it, and we managed to fit our show into it. 10 years, things are starting to fall apart. We start updating the whole infrastructure in the facility. The first thing we upgraded was the audio console. So the Yamaha's gone, not totally gone. It's sitting in a closet. But now we have the System T. In the control room I work in, we have the 300. We have the little baby 300. The 16 fader bay single tile console, because that's as wide a console as we could fit. We could have gone as wide as a DM2000, but because the control room was built around that, but that's narrower than a 32 fader bay, so there couldn't fit that. But we've been able to integrate even into fewer faders because we have stereo faders now. We have the ability to fly things in and off, onto and off the surface live during the show. I mean, if we have an issue and suddenly one of the codecs I'm using is a problem and we have to bring in something else that I don't have on the surface, you can go to Layer Manager and grab that asset and drag it right onto the surface and replace the broken one almost instantaneously. And because we actually have more assets we have to access than fit in 16 faders, we do that a lot. You know, for one meeting, we have a setup, and the next one, we may need different assets for that. We haven't actually had to fly stuff in like that during a show live, but we could. It's that seamless that it's just no problem at all. But we often do it between sessions. You know, one meeting ends, another one starts. We bring in different assets for that new meeting because that's what we're using for that one. And so it's a whole different workflow than I've been used to. And we're still building this out. We've done a lot of labeling within the system, which I must say is critical in the System 300, that you get your labeling organized, because you don't really use Dante controller anymore to patch things. You patch them from the console in what I can only call an object-oriented way. You don't, you have groups named and you have assets named, and you patch them very verbally within the console throughout the entire, covering the entire system. And it's a very easy way to approach the patching as opposed to Dante controller. However, it's highly dependent on you having everything named, which Dante controller is too, but Dante controller channels stay the same every time. System T really picks its own channels. It finds available assets within its system and uses them as you make patches. So maybe when you look at something in Dante controller, you may have trouble finding it, but finding it in the console is easy as long as you have everything named. Unfortunately, because of COVID and the sort of hurried installation to make this transition as we're starting to build out this new facility, we didn't actually get much training. So we got, I know Andrew Hollis is watching. He's on the attendees list I saw. Andrew spent a couple of days with us, getting us up to speed on the console, but there's really a lot of stuff we would still like to learn. There's a lot of, it's very deep. There's a lot of stuff there, and we're blundering through it and learning it as we go. And it's a lot of stuff, and so you learn a little bit of it at a time, But it is, you can do that. You can figure that stuff out, and it becomes clear to you. Although I will say, I got a question maybe for Thomas. In the analyzer, there are two colors. I don't know, what are the two colors? If I'm looking at an input channel with the analyzer turned on, looking at the EQ with the analyzer turned on.
Oh, you're catching me out here.
Yeah, there's like two traces of different colors, and I don't know what they are.
Right.
I can't find that in the manual.
I have to get back to you on that one specifically.
I think it's pre and post dynamics. I could be wrong though. Could be wrong, but I think it's pre and post.
Well, okay, I guess it would be pre and post EQ because we're looking at it in an EQ window, and it's a EQ spectrum display.
Yeah.
But it's not clear what it is. But so
This
things like that, we're learning.
May add to Mac's comment about not getting enough training. I mean, one of the things as we're looking at COVID and sort of how we can help and facilitate things for our clients, we're pursuing remote training as options. So some of the things that we're doing, and Andrew, as you mentioned, who was on the call here, my colleague, and we've been using some tools to actually gain remote access to our consoles and set up webinars where we're able to teach people how to use them and run the console remotely, similar to what I was presenting the actual thing.
Right. Yeah.
And actually, we've been helping out around the world with that. So Andrew recently did a training session with people in England, like in London, a client there. So I think we should definitely, when this is all said and done, we should look into maybe getting in and helping you guys out with some remote training.
Yeah, it's an interesting point actually. I had a short discussion with Steve about that the other day, about team viewing in. Our issue is because of Security and Exchange Commission rules, we can't have any outside network connected in the building. We can only have Wi-Fi in the building. So we get on the internet via Wi-Fi, and that's the only connection we're allowed to have because it breaks financial rules.
Mac, you bring up a good point, and Kenny just chimed in. When you develop for multiple platforms, you get the benefit of a common platform and the ability to serve two separate and distinct areas of the business, broadcast and live. And some of that's shared in our effects processing that's on board. Some of it's shared as a new feature that first came out in the broadcast console in the live console that morphed over to the broadcast console, where there's a playback switcher that has traditionally been a function of Pro Tools and a third-party box, but now we've taken that functionality and put it into the console for both the live console and then for the broadcast console, and that will afford you a certain level of integration now with Dante, for example, where those sources come in and can be switched instantaneously with a tone select, pilot tone that will allow you to instantaneously change over your playback tracks for production. So I think we see a great ability to serve both markets well, and trying to be true to the topic of this conversation, I'd like to go back to Michael and all three the panelists and say, where do you see some of the practical limitations? A little story, Michael and I were talking about Grammy show planning with networking and Dante last year, and some of the things that seemingly are sacrosanct, having live with its own set of sync and broadcast with its own sync. It was a never the twain shall meet situation. It was a very strong reluctance to have sync shared between the two for all the obvious reasons. You wouldn't want one bad patch pulling down the whole show. But through a series of conversations with Audinate and a greater awareness of some of the newer ways that Domain Manager, for example, could help this along, and some of the new tools from SSL and others, there was a greater willingness, I felt, to have network shared. And as we move into the future, Michael, why don't you pick up on that and see where you see this going, certainly as you go into phase 2 and 3, and Kenny as well.
Yeah, and Kenny and I had kind of a brief experience with one project together, a learning curve a learn.
Huge.
And at this point, pretty much all of these are learning experiences, the way I look at them. You walk away with a knowledge base usually you didn't have in the past. But going back to your point, Phil, any new technology that I've vetted or have tried to introduce, or people have tried to introduce into a show like the Grammys, there's a year background work that goes on with that. And you know, I'm thankful prior to you jumping on board, back on board with SSL, the amount of energy and pushing me to propagate into this Dante networking protocol. It was phenomenal, and it showed me, as you explained, there's a new realization of what Dante was then, what it is now. But again, going just sync as one element, the strides that have been made as technology and hardware that we have available, where this faction, this entity with the Grammys engineering wouldn't want to lose the master sync, and this entity didn't want to have another sync. They all wanted to be autonomous to each other. And back in the days when this started out with sync being a player back with PM1Ds and what have you, it was a basis of redundancy, where if the truck mix went through the bed, we had in the router of the transmission path the front of house mix, because if we weren't sharing the same clock, we were autonomous. Now you've got the brainstorm distribulizer word clock. It's been around for years, but when I heard the conversations that we were having, people mentioning that as a bridge for this clocking solution, I was taken aback, and I was heartened, because the state engineering that all these guys are doing, they're all failure based options. You know, we can't have a failure, and when we do, my life is hell for about 3 months afterwards on a show like the Grammys. But yeah, it's SSL, and I'm not shilling you guys, but that HRC box, that's a great solution. We've talked about, I'm sorry, the bridge. It's a great solution, and it's a tool for moving forward that a couple of the companies that we work with have seen it, they like it, they say, you know, proof of concept is proof of performance, and it works. Dante domain, I still have the challenges because we have such a quick turnaround, a quick load-in period. As I said to the fellows at Audinate, why can't we have an editor that we can build subscriptions? I know, Mac, bear with me. It just, we don't have the time to manage it, and then we don't have the time to unmanage it. And that's the big challenge. What I like, what I've seen on the T, and I'm just now getting introduced to it through George at Sessions there in Chatsworth, the subscription, I don't think it's no longer, it's integrated well. And I think that will play into managing subscriptions. But one overriding thing that I've got to point out is all these large scale projects where we're implementing Dante, getting a production to understand there needs to be a network manager it's an implicit part of the process. You can't have management by this guy. There's no coordination. And Kenny knows that better as we experienced with a client that they had this fabulous facility built, and it got handed over by the integrator. And a year later, prior to you coming on board, we had another event, and all the firmware updates weren't being managed because they didn't have somebody dedicated in this amazing facility managing the network. It would fall to whoever needed something.
Right.
No coordination whatsoever. And I found already on shows that I've been working on the past year, where even comms is going down a Dante path, the coordination between the truck engineer and the comms engineer on the floor, they're not in sync. So when they find they're getting congestion on a cast, they'll switch over to another switch, and that will manage that port on the comm system. Well, now it doesn't work because the switch that they went to isn't PoE. And everybody's scratching their heads, and it's painfully obvious that the two weren't correlated. So you've got all these factors, and as you and I learned a couple days ago at the studio, workflows within large entities, studios, and recording facilities. The IT guy coming in who has no agenda for audio gets a ticket to do something and changes the switch management. And we come back in, and the word assumed was used, which I cautioned the individual, but never assume anything in audio. You know, proof of concept, vetting, management. So these are elements of stepping into this world and being successful. And the failures that we have are the learning curves that we take away.
Great, thank you, Michael. Kenny, what's your, on the flip side, if Michael's taking a feed from PA and you're feeding broadcast, tell us from the other side, or your experiences when you're feeding trucks and press boxes and whatever else you're involved.
It's always been a battle, right? Because it always turns into, I work for a band, you work for a network or a truck. If the truck is wrong, right? If I give you a feed and it's wrong, or the mix is wrong, or it sounds wrong, I'm going to get yelled at, right? So there was always this or get fired, right? I've had friends get fired over like really bad TV mixes, but the artists don't understand. But it's like, why is he mixing it? Well, that's because there's a TV truck and stuff like that, right? So we've been on festivals and stuff like that. We've been pretty Loctite on our stuff, and for the last 2 years, and it's funny because broadcast is starting to come into this. You go to like places, certain studios in New York or LA and stuff like that, and yeah, we need a split, analog split. Oh, we don't have that. We have a MADI split, and it was working great for years. Yeah, I loved it. It's like we're just using MADI, so I can give you a split. It's gonna be left and right, or like right. Can we just give you a Dante line? That way I can give you the split if you need it. And then now studios are getting hurt. Oh, we can do MADI, we can do Dante, we can do that stuff. Like all right, but it's been, I think it's been better, a lot better. Like Mike said, it's a huge learning curve once you start getting into sync, PoE, managed switches, routers, network cable, length, clock, bit, all that stuff. It's a big learning curve. And like the boxes that are coming out today, like the SSL box, the Bridge box, the direct out audio has a great box that we've been using as far as syncing stuff down, what we need to do. It's changed our life a lot. And now it got to the point where typically like you go to a festival, you have to plug in the analog split, tap the mics, right? Like any, or even like the iHeartRadio shows that I do with Firehouse or something like that. We tap the mics, and the only time the truck gets to hear the stuff is when they actually tap the mics and get everything going. Well, like a touring session like us, nothing changes. Once we pick the mic, here's the position, everything's marked and all that stuff. We're able to go in and do playback and do virtual line check off the SSL, off our Dante or MADI lines straight into the truck. And so when the truck has downtime, you can switch over to us. Yeah, hey man, if you want to hear that we're playing back the stuff right now, you can listen to it, make sure our lines and everything are good and connected, rather than just waiting. All right, A stage is done. We're moving over to B. Let's connect the hose. Oh wait, we got ground loops. Where's that buzz coming from? Front of house is clean. I don't know what you're talking about. Monitors is clean. Well, something's up with the truck. Like, how many times have you run into that situation where you're just twiddling thumbs because something somewhere is not right? So being able to have, yeah.
Go ahead, please.
No, I was just saying, just basically having the option of having the stuff connected and just, you know, constantly playing in the background. It's not hurting anybody. It's just there, and having to be able to switch over and, okay, we're still good. You know, it's amazing.
Let me clarify one thing, Kenny. You use iHeart and Firehouse as one example. So in that scenario, are you spitting them out a Dante source and they're deluxing it as needed?
No, that source, that Firehouse is pretty much, it's all MADI. It depends. I mean, the mixed mobile is there, or Denali or whoever else is there. But as far
M3.
as M3, excuse me. but I'm talking like when I show up to, so when I show up to like Global Citizens a couple of years ago, we were able to do, there was a big pushback between our production and the festival production. Big pushback as far as our artists like our containment because we worked on the mix for a very long time. But production pushback as far as, yes, we understand that, but we're here. This is our equipment. We know the best quality for music for TV. We understand what you're doing, but it may not be. So there's that whole world, right? Live music for a live concert, then TV broadcasts are two different worlds, but they're not really.
I'm so immersed in that, and
Yeah.
you and I have not had that encounter of that sort.
No.
Good or bad, but I understand the artist's desires. I understand the stakeholder, the global citizen or the network or the production. I had a scenario where, there's 8 or 12 acts in the world that we give special preference to, for lack of a better phrase. But there's a relationship between us and the engineers and the management and the artists sometimes. But our back gets pushed against the wall, then I have to take the politics, the electroacoustic politics, and I have to go down the technical path. And the technical path is, okay, is if this is a live to tape performance, can you sync it up to video? 9 out of 10 times, the engineers or the equipment with the band is not video centric. They're just audio centric. So the point at that time is the mix you do that we get is the mix you live with. There's no remix. So we, on a live television show, we like to sometimes pre-tape things just because of blocking, and we remix and we reinsert it into a 5.1 sound field. And typically you guys are just doing a stereo mix. So there's all these factors that play into it. But going back to, for the signal distribution, I remember when Maddie first started getting inserted into our workflow in the TV trucks, and it was a nightmare. Various different types of SRC boxes were employed. You come directly off the digital rack, for lack of better discussion, at that time, and the mapping was all over the place. Or they were in a shadow mode where you got the kick on channels 1 and 2. I remember with one act for a DirecTV thing I did. It's gotten much better, but it's still, it's the front end, what that group that we're working with and their knowledge base and how scalable they are if things aren't mapped correctly, or if there's clocking issues, or the format they're in, or the 56, 64 channel protocol, all these factors. And that's kind of my job on the Grammys, is coordinating all of that and getting stuff forced down my throat. And at some point, I'm not here to fight a battle. I'm just here to collaborate, get you on the air. And that's kind of how I approach working with the different artists. But relationship is key to that.
Oh, I mean, no one likes jerks. Right? And if you have an introduction and the first thing that happens is you're a jerk, we're all on it's a bad day at that point.
Yeah,
go get a coffee, come back when you cheer up.
It doesn't help the technical process.
Well, as it relates to the network engineering aspect, it's an interesting concept of the point you just mentioned, because you don't want a network engineering specialist from Price Waterhouse being involved in your television show. Maybe he's managing data networks for Fortune 500 companies. He's not the right guy. You don't necessarily want the Office Depot computer fixer guy who may know something about a NIC card. And it's an interesting sort of job spec where you get someone who has awareness of production technologies and the cool of the coolest rock star. In Kenny's role, you got to be able to deal with artists and artist management. Michael, in your role, you got to deal with 10 artists and artist management in a given moment. Someone like and Mac, I don't, you might deal with a Price Waterhouse because they're more comfortable in your world.
Yeah.
But where Thomas has to come in is he's got to be the cool guy who can walk into any of these environments. But it definitely is a requirement for someone to be able to deal with the networking technologies with a sense of production cool, and that's a new challenge.
Yeah, and
Michael and I talked about how do you groom that guy, the the cool production guy may not know enough about networking, and the great networking guru may not know enough about how to hang in a television show or festival.
But to that point, it's where do you find these guys? I've been fortunate with the companies that I work with. I get a lot of names passed to me, and I'm constantly, I mean, when I talk to the newer generation coming in, I tell them, forget about, I want you to have an analog backbone knowledge base, but the diagnostics in our world now are not looking for a pin 1 lift with a phase reverse.
Right.
It's mapping switches, understanding what the switches do,
and clocking.
All the aspects of it. But the newer people, they don't have a preconceived idea of audio. I sometimes joke with video switchers. They're used to playing on video games. It's just an extension of what they grew up with. Audio guys, it seems everybody wants to sit in my chair on their first year doing the job. They have no idea what I do. A lot of people don't know what I do.
I don't want to sit in your chair after 45 years.
No, it's, there's days I rue my existence, a Skype remote. But the point being is you've got these young kids coming in, and I stress the importance of IP technology, because that's what our job is going to turn into if it hasn't already.
It already has. Yeah, we're there.
We're there. And it's going to get...
Well, but I've been saying to a lot of the guys that work in my end of the business during this time, I said, take the time to get your network certification. Take the time to learn this, learn that, innovate. Coming out of this, as I said, and I think we're all agreeing, we're going to be going down this rabbit hole so deeply for the next year and a half that this is going to become status quo.
2110.
I'm looking, 2110. I'm looking, I see Direct Out putting it up on LinkedIn where they've got 3 locations. You got a piano and an acoustic guitar, a bass and a drummer, and a vocalist performing in 3 different discrete locations in Europe, going to a centralized location using a common GPS-based clock for synchronicity. How they're playing together, that hasn't been defined to me. I think they've got 3 click tracks going simultaneously that's coming off an audio bridge or something of that nature. But that's in the business I'm in right now. All these shows are looking to get performances done in a unique way remotely.
Right.
And
in the world we're in today,
is going to provide it. Yes.
In the world we're in today, that's definitely the case. But to the point of 2110, it is going to step up the level of what you need to know as a network engineer, because the PTP v2 that's going to be necessary for 2110, it's necessary for modern comm systems like Bolero, Riedel and Bolero, needs precision timing. And this is a step that business type, your Price Waterhouse network guy, this is something he's going to have no experience with. It's going to be a whole new world. And the young guys coming up who understand networking at a more basic level and going to develop into these people who are going to be managing these networks, this is something they're going to need to know. And being that their young minds are young, they're going to be able to learn it.
Yeah. Well, look at the setup we went through, prior to going on air with this, with all our individual computers, with the privacies and the firewalls. Yeah. You've got the same scenario, Phil. I'm not pointing you out, but you got the same scenarios.
But
you go
Steve,
to
we're not pointing you out.
Sony Studios, ever since they got hacked by the Koreans, it's next to impossible to get a simple Wi-Fi in that location.
Right.
They want MAC addresses of the truck, which the truck's doesn't want to hand out because it's a security for a large company like NEP. So everybody's very centric for the security, and this is one of the components that we were talking about on this remote project for mixing. That when you start playing with the big stakeholders, you got to have security. And that only forces you further down the rabbit hole with IT technology. Above
Yeah,
and beyond what we're talking
I
about.
like Dante Domain Manager. I think it's almost time that we go for some questions. And some of the questions I'd like, Thomas, for you to kind of do a little brief on. We talk a lot about Dante. Dante allows you to do AS67 flows. AS67 is the base of audio for SMPTE 2110. Thomas, talk a little bit about, we'll get to the specific question, but talk a little bit about what you do and how you pull all these technologies that have more in common than apart, but how do you pull the apart parts together?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess so a couple of points first, just to address some questions earlier. Mac, the two different colors is left and right on the stereo input on your spectrum analyzer.
Didn't even occur to me to look at which channels were stereo and which were mono.
Right. There you go. Yeah, I think it's interesting. A director of engineering for a TV station I was doing some installs with, he referred to this conundrum of the new type of engineer that they're looking for, and he referred to them as bits or broadcasts IT people. And I think it speaks to all of your comments earlier, where you're looking for IT people with broadcast sensibility, because they need to understand the sort of the broadcast level of requirements for live production, and not think of it in straight IT terms of like, well, we can look at his problem tomorrow and he'll get in the queue. And I think, as someone that, we've been working with audio, for a long time. I've been doing audio with SSL for close to 20 years now, and the different technologies have changed, but ultimately our role is as a facilitator and being able to connect the right people together and make sure that we communicate, the right requests to the IT departments within, networks and so on and so forth. But yeah, I think, within SSL, and specifically with the Dante implementation that we've chosen, our focus in the last few years have been, with regards to SMPTE 2110 and AS67, has been, to enhance the interoperability between those standards and the Dante network. So we've worked, very closely with Ordinate over the last few years as the AIMS organization and the various parts of SMPTE has worked towards compliance testing and so on. We've been part of that, and we've been participating in a number of the interoperability tests that's been going on, where we've bringing equipment along with other, like 70 other manufacturers, and have been testing and ensuring that there is connectivity and it's working, and understanding the pitfalls of merged networks in that sense. So that's what we've been doing, and the new firmware and software that's been released here recently ensures SMPTE 2110 and Ordinate Dante can live on the same network.
And so Thomas, you spend a lot of your time figuring all that out, and Dante and SMPTE 2110 to be functional. So great. Anything else you want to say before I move on to another question?
No.
Okay, thank you.
A specific question within that.
We'll get there. So one question: SSL has such a great pedigree. Thank you very much. Have you thought about adding Dante to the home studio market you're edging into? Well, I'll take that one. For those who don't know, we've just introduced a line of low cost, high quality audio interfaces that are $229 and $279, and they're USB-C. Well, and these are very high quality interfaces. We can't make them quick enough. Very interestingly, just last week, Ordinate announced that there's going to be USB-C to Dante Connector on the Avio platform, which are typically under $100 devices. The reason why we don't put it in there, because it's a $100 device. We don't want to add it to the cost of that system for everyone else. And I'm very curious to see how this device would play nicely with our USB-C device. But the potential there.
And speaking again with all of our I/O and so on, we've also the Nucleus, which is our small controller.
I have one.
Okay, so the original, it has 2 mic pre's built into it, as you know, and a sound card for monitoring. And in the original version, it was USB, but in the new version, it's the Mark II version of the Nucleus. It's Dante. So there is products in our range now, even at the Project Studio level, that implements Dante.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting with some of this that Dante goes down to 2 channels. Most of the stuff we do is 3264 channels, but the high capacity is what we're doing in System T. I don't know if that got mentioned early on. The System T is based on these 256 wide chips, and you stack them up.
512.
Excuse me, 512. In the case of HC Bridge, it's 256 on either side for the sample rate conversion, but it's high capacity. And even with Maddie, we had have a high capacity 256 way bridge. So we have to deal with high capacity in all cases. But we have 2 sides of the spectrum: the super high end with the high capacity, and what people might want in a low capacity. Okay, so someone asked.
Can I make one point to that? It's surprising the other sound reinforcement market share of consoles, and Kenny and I, again, another common experience where we maxed out once we started doing in a live sound reinforcement format, immersive layouts. We found we hit a brick wall. So where you're coming in with the high capacity channel count is a major factor for consideration when you're sourcing and looking and writing a spec. What you think right now is going to service you in the next 4 years, 5 years, if you're making a capital outlay, you'll be very saddened if you don't take into consideration the high capacity counts that you're going to need down the road, whether the pandemic's here or not.
Exactly. Let's not talk about pedigree. Let's not forget to talk about sound quality. Here we are an hour and a half in, and no one's ever brought it up. So one of the things that I found very clearly with Dante is that because its sync is at the common off-the-shelf switches use a sync that's 10 times PCM, you get a level of jitter and sync performance that's beyond PCM, and you really can't put your finger on it, but I imagine you can measure it if you're a scientist, but it does do something to the sound quality that some find quite pleasing. Kenny, how have you found that?
Oh yeah, no. So what sold it for me is like on another manufacturer, switched over to the SSL once it came out. I've been on since version 1, so thank you for all the updates. But we multi-tracking every night. I was multi-tracking on my own stuff. Monitor guy was multi-tracking on his own stuff, and basically back and forth. We had some downtime for about 4 weeks, and my monitor guy Marty was like, "Hey, can I get the hard drive?" "Yeah." "Why? Yours don't hard?" "Because I just want to hear your," because he was on the fence, right? He's a hardcore hardcore Digico fan. Great console, SD7, redundant. It's a great console, but that was just his workflow that he liked. He knew it, and that he was just comfortable with it. He can get stuff fast, right? Because it all comes down to workflow. So he took the hard drive home. Within, I would say probably about 2 days, he called me. "Hey, I just started listening to the drive." "Yeah." "Are those really your mic pre's?" "Yeah." He's like, "You didn't do anything. This isn't like post. This is pre." "Yeah." I was like, "That's just the heads, dude." "So are you doing less at front of house?" "Yeah, doing a lot less at front of house." It's like, it's great. My job's a lot easier. I can actually focus on the PA or, tie lines to the broadcast or whatever. It's like, we're gonna have a conversation about the next tour. And then sure enough, the week after that, he's based out of the UK. He went up to Oxford to go do a little demo, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm sold. We're doing this." It's like, perfect, great. Smaller package now. We can get rid of the split.
Shameless plugs for our company. We've been doing digital for decades as well. And what's the sound of digital is a conversion. And our converters are based on the super analog technology we developed for the 9000 series console, which was a $750,000 console, mostly minimum, and they got larger than that. And we took that technology and put it into our mic preamps, and everyone says that the sound of the SSL live console is leaps and shoulders ahead of anything else. And I like to think that super analog is 10 foot wider and 6 foot deeper, and with a coherency that you can appreciate. And Kenny, you've got direct experience with that.
Yeah, the one thing I will say that was never mentioned about this was like when I first was said I was going to switch over to the L500 when it first came out, I got a lot of blowback from certain people, vendors and all that stuff. Like, you shouldn't take it out. It's not a tri-true console. This is it's brand new gig. You're doing some A-level shows. You should actually stick with the console you're on. It's not a smart move. And my response was like, SSL's been making computers and consoles for over like 30 years, well over 30 years. I think they got it down, right? I think they got it down. And sure enough, like, I mean, I think the whole entire time I've been on that console, I think I've had one issue, one issue, and call somebody, get right back to you, tell you what's up, they'll either say, okay, this is the issue, here's how we can get around it right now, if this is a deal breaker for you, and then we'll have the part for you tomorrow. And sure enough, like, got around it, did the show was fine. It was actually one of the better shows I had. Next morning, we're in Texas, got the part delivered, you know, on FaceTime, putting it in, telling me how to put it in. And then the next day, I think somebody came out, I think it was Andrew, came out to the show, just make sure everything was cool. Real good, everything good? Yeah, perfect. So like the service is phenomenal with SSL.
Another part of our pedigree, clearly, and it's on Thomas's back and Andrew's back. Thank you. Let's talk about some more questions. Which network certification can you recommend? I'm working on gaining CCNA, but maybe you can recommend other certification processes, other certification programs. I'm only aware of Cisco. Anyone else want to take that on?
Cisco's a good one.
Yeah. I think in that kind of frame, yes, it's Cisco, but the additional thing is, as Michael said earlier, that people coming in the industry don't know about production. I mean, we work in a very different environment than the rest of the world. Like the network guys who say, well, yeah, that we'll put that on our list and we'll get to it. There's no put it on the list and get to it. It's do it now and get it done. And it's just a different way of working, and a lot of people have trouble understanding that that's just the way production is. It's why we do it. It's because we like working that way.
We were doing a thing, some testing the other day of a studio that's within a corporate environment, and they had an IT change. I think Mike, you might have alluded to it earlier. And they called the IT department. IT department said, "Could you write up send a ticket on that?" And we're like, "No, we have an artist in the studio, and we're going cross country with audio. We need that change done now." Yeah. Okay, it's a sense of purpose, really.
The CCNA is the course I was alluding to, so that that's a good starting entry level. As you get deeper into the 40 chapters, it's not entry level, but and to what Matt says, I personally, I'm in that world on the front end where I see the disciplines that we have to have, and because of what I don't know is forcing me to, I don't want to sit on the fence and have to call on Kenny to fix something down the road, no offense, in a network topography. I'd rather be able to sit there and troubleshoot it myself. We're very partitioned in our jobs in a broadcast truck. My truck engineer, the audio scientist, Hugh Healy, a few of us know, he's tasked with making sure I don't go down the wrong path and go too deep down a rabbit hole because I could do something that would jeopardize downstream something in his world. So we keep like this invisible fence between the two of us. When I have issues that delve into the IT partition of everything, I push it over to somebody that knows more. Always work with somebody that's smarter than yourself.
And it's yeah.
Good. Even it gets more granular. We know someone who's a great system tech on festivals, but has he ever dealt with feeding millions of people for shows? It's a finite details there. Okay, so next question, probably for you, Thomas. Are we going to see more of a future of needing to interface ST2110 audio streams into the regular signal path rather than just AES67? Will we be seeing more of the routing processing through something like Meteor Net multi-signal frames?
Well, I think, you know, seeing that SEMTA 2110 sort of its foundation for the audio side was referred to as 2110-30 is based on AES-67 with some minor tweaks to make it more applicable in very large broadcast situations. And those kind of things are not necessarily detrimental to using AES-67 in smaller systems, but you know, for a very quick, basically AES-67, you know, like Dante, to solve audio problems on small scale, you know, to a large scale, had a lot of sort of automatic features built into it. For instance, when we talk about a lot about syncing, so one of the things about a network is to establish who's the master within the network. So Dante has, you know, the priority of electing a grand master, and everything slaves to that. That functionality within AES-67 is an automatic process as well by default, so that any device can become a grand master. Now, as you move on to a large infrastructure, like in a network facility where you have a very dedicated clock topology with a grandmaster that's GPS synced or something like that, you don't want random devices trying to become audio masters. So one of the specifications within the SEMTA 2110 AES-67 implementation is that you should be able to turn grandmaster off so that the device never tries to take over. So I think to a lot of extent you can use the SEMTA 2110-30 like streams and AES-67 sort of interchangeable, and the media alliance that promoted AES-67 has been adopted into the SEMTA 2110 infrastructure. So I think, yeah, we'll definitely see, you know, whenever we're going to talk broadcast, I think we'll see SEMTA 2110 be the requirement.
That's great, thank you. This one's probably for Kenny. You see lots of different technologies and topologies of networking. Are you incorporating, Kenny, Waves plugins into your system? Are you utilizing the SSL stuff?
That's so funny. I have a hashtag. I'm not going to say it here, but I typically been using all the stuff in the console. When I built my rig, I looked at it as a system tech standpoint of what is going to fail and what just getting beat up into cases, things are going to rattle, things are going to break. So what's the path of least resistance? Not having a whole lot of crap. So I tend to keep it pretty slim, and I tend to use everything that's on board of the console. And honestly, it sounds great. All this stuff there, it's great. It may not look like, I feel like some people just use plugins because it looks good, you know, but like, or but
There's something to do all night.
Yeah, I mean, it's video games at some point. But so I tend to keep everything inside the console because it's not a matter of if it fails, it's when it fails. And then it's a matter of, all right, how do I get things up and running after I figure out what is wrong, right? So I feel that like if you have to, you know, it's great. I've seen some amazing people and there's some amazing engineers out there, and I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just my philosophy is I don't want two big giant refrigerators of like, you know, 4 racks of 24 deep of just outboard gear, and then sum all that stuff up into my console with also a Wave server and a UA server and everything else. And then, oh shit, sorry. I mean, like I can't, sound check's happening. I don't have audio. What's going on? What's not, I don't have the vocal. What's not working? So that's just my philosophy.
We can integrate the Wave server into the console through any interface.
I'm actually, for my record, I'm actually using Waves MGBs. That's the one Waves product I'm using, and I'm using for record. And the only reason why I'm using Wave SB because it's this nice small package I can shove in my backpack when I do flight aids.
Perfect.
So.
But now on the, there was a question, would it be possible to integrate remote control for UAD in the live series? It's a new question. I haven't seen that before. Thomas, you want to tackle that?
Well, it's not something, again, within the system, we keep all the control of our plugins, etc., locked down to specific SSL plugins. The Tempest engine that we talked about is a true 64-bit real-time processing system, which is dedicated for our audio processing, and we maintain, you know, integrity of that. I think, you know, to Kenny's point where the console is rock solid, one of the things is, you know, to keep control of all aspects of the ecosystem within the console, is what, you know, Procedure says. So.
Well, one of our users on live, he was incorporating the Wave server, and I was very impressed because Wave recommends a dedicated network separate from Dante, and he actually had the Waves on the same network. Chris Stevens with Jason Aldean, I was very impressed with that. So it's possible. Everything's possible. Let's talk in the couple minutes we have left about the future of immersive audio. You laid out the framework for how it works in the console. We touched on it a little bit when we were doing our pre-pro the other day. We talked about the future of Atmos, and certainly Atmos has been on you know, Dolby's been on a tear to get it integrated into film, and they've been very successful with that, and they've been successful in getting it into television. Where we're going to see it in live, I think Michael will be the first one to say it's difficult enough to get stereo on the air, let alone 5.1, and immersive doesn't make it any easier with Atmos. But there are forces both in the broadcast side with Atmos and certainly in the live side with a variety of formats from Meyer and L Acoustics to incorporate immersive. Maybe Kenny and Michael, you would talk to that.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, Meyer has some products out there. L Acoustics has their stuff. D&B has some stuff. It's all cool. It's all great. My concern is when we're going to be very budget happy or wise when we get out of this, that whether or not adding 2 more people, 36 more speakers, some truss motors, and all that other stuff is going to be budget happy.
It's not going to be more. It's going to be less.
Yeah, it's going to be less. I have a strong feeling of that one. So with that being said, the stuff's amazing. If you have like a DJ act or anything like that, you can definitely get really, really happy with all the other stuff. But in the end, it's all about the bed. It's the left, right. To be able to do an Atmos rig in an arena, that is costly. To be able to do an Atmos certified show in a festival, good luck. Like,
16 wait times per area.
Yeah, that and just getting everyone covered so everyone has a seam of being able to hear everything and it doesn't sound like it's coming from a million miles away and all this other stuff. I think that we just started stepping into it in the live aspect. I mean, in film, we had surround for what, 20 years now, something like that, a little bit longer. So they're knee deep in the water as we are still ankle deep, I feel.
That's a great way to put it. And Michael, where do you see this future?
Well, I see it being propagated more live. There's certain applications musically that would subscribe to the use of immersive. EDM, I'm not an EDM fan. It's not my demographic, but I have to imagine that would be huge. And if you did it at the big tent at Coachella, you know, again, deploying an Atmos system, the vendor that I work with here in LA, they were tasked with one of their award shows doing a install of Atmos in conjunction with Dolby. And it was a major play of product placement. And the exercise, again, gave us a knowledge of cost, hardware, the factors that come into play, content. And I get tasked with some shows saying, we want to do this. And I have to ask the same questions. You know, Grammys is a good example. There's a weight restriction on how much you can dead hang from the ceiling. It's 300,000 pounds. The baseline weight of the show is 175,000 pounds. That leaves you 125,000 pounds to play with, which acts come in and want to utilize that weight with special bits and pieces and presentations for their performances. So you're tasked with, you know, giving up the visual versus the oral. And in television, in a live environment, the oral is always going to lose. It's all about the picture up on the screen. And a producer said to me many years ago, for broadcast, I'll pay any money to make that video monitor pop. What are you going to do with audio that's going to make it better than that? And the other flip side of that is the director said to me, starting up doing 5.1, and I'm using language that he didn't use. I don't care what you do, just don't distract from my video. And that's the fine line. Eric Schilling and I went up to Skywalker Ranch last year, and we took some performances from the show with the multitracks. We had all the production elements, all the music elements, and we mixed this. He mixed over 2 days. He mixed 2 or 3 performances, and I was there for one of them. And the first thing I wanted to hear was sitting in that room. It was a home cinema room, not one of the largest dubbing stages. I sat there and listened to a performance, and it sounded like I was in the 10th row at Staples. I've never heard 5.1 do that sound field, that type of sound field. So I've got an Ambio soundbar, and I've got Blu-rays of the show. I want to play it through in a faux immersive sound field that the Ambio soundbar does. I think there's a future in it because it's an attraction, but the business model for television is shifting so radically. You know, there was a prediction 10 years ago that all the cable channels would disappear because it would go into streaming. They'd all the consolidation with all these different networks. That hasn't happened yet. But I think down the road, there's going to be less broadcast channels, despite what one network said it's the best business model for advertising that currently exists. That's true. And I think that's one of the reasons it's still there as much as it is. But for broadcast, I don't see it happening in the near future. But what I do on the shows that I work on, I have a platform to do experimentation of extra sound bed paths. And I do experiment with some ambisonic devices. I do mic placement. I do processing on the mic placement. And what's interesting to me is see how it converts on a down mix in a 5.1 that I typically mix in. I do that so that when I do have the opportunity to start doing immersive, which I've done a lot of immersive projects for Netflix and Amazon, I'm prepared for doing it live.
Great, thank you. I want to just address one more question and then we'll look to wrap it up. There was a question, how well do SSL products play with third-party Dante products? I think the basic awareness of Dante is that there's 2,000 products of over 400 manufacturers. And the way that Dante works is that every single one of those manufacturers are dealing with a common firmware that's developed and supported and constantly upgraded by Audinate. So every single Dante product, with rare exception, works flawlessly together. They just plug it in and play.
With proper firmware management.
Exactly. No, there's no question about that. That's part of the job. But when everyone's on the same firmware, Dante supports that, and that's one of the major reasons why Dante is the predominant force within the networking of all audio everywhere. Is that just works. So there are certain things that companies can do together. Thomas, you can talk to what we do with Shure. I think there's certain products we support uniquely. When you want to
yeah, so certainly, yeah, no, absolutely. So within the Dante API, the communication protocol that they provide between devices has space for manufacturers to implement certain, specific things that they need to, so that they don't need to have a separate control. So we use that extensively throughout our range of products. So when you hook up a Dante stage box to the Dante network and you connect a console, aside from just finding it and making routing controls, we can also get information from that stage box, like what the temperature is inside it, what the fan speeds are like, the power supply statuses and all that stuff. That information is transmitted within the Dante communication system. As manufacturers implement these things, we can share that information between us. And as you're saying, one of the things that we've done recently is within System T software, we can remote the front end of a Shure mic pre. So Shure makes these small announcement boxes. They're like little lunch boxes with 2 or 4 microphones in them. that's power over Ethernet that you can drop anywhere within the Dante network. When you connect that and the console can see it, we have the ability to control front-end mic pre control, and that's done through the Dante API. So, so as people are willing to share that information, you know, the capabilities will grow on systems like that.
One thing we didn't, thank you, Thomas. One thing that we didn't talk about is that our Dante stage boxes are able to be used as a standalone. There's a stage box control panel, SSL control, that you can control our stage boxes, and people implement them all the time. To that point, they integrate with any other Dante device. So even though they're, you know, purpose built for our consoles where we can control the head amp gain and other functions, there is a control software program that allows you to use them as a standalone device and get every bit of the SSL quality with you know, plus 24 dB and you know, all the headroom characteristics and great sound that we put in there. I'll close with right on time a comment that someone made, which I actually love and I've lived with forever, having started in the live sound business myself. We're only one of the only industries where deadlines are actually real. As I tell the youngins, as soon as somebody prints and sells a ticket that says 8 p.m. Thursday, June 28th, it sets in motion a chain of events that is very hard to stop. I really like that comment, and yeah. I think it's a great capper to a great day. I want to thank everyone on the call, Steve Zaretsky for the wonderful presentation, Thomas Jensen for your prowess, Mac for putting it together with Peter Erskine, two very intelligent folks that have been around for quite some time, Kelly in the background, and then Kenny and Michael. You know, you guys work together and apart. A lot of respect, mutual respect for both of you guys and doing everything you do, and look forward to seeing everyone along the way here. So thank you very much. Thank you for all the attendance, for spending the time and sticking with us through our you know, spinning our propellers chat. We really appreciate it and look forward to any questions that were unanswered. Please reach out to Thomas at SSL or anyone on the call, and we very much like to stay in touch and figure out how we can make an SSL product for you.
Thank you,
Phil. That was really great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was terrifically informative, and short of actually having a console sitting in front of me, it's as good as it can get. Thank you. One thing I want to let everybody know is tomorrow we have a terrific presentation by Electrosonics on their new D-Square digital wireless, all that stuff that everybody's afraid to use. No latency, or very little. And we're really eager to hear about that. And then if you want to support our effort, both from Patreon and from PayPal on our website, please put your donations for $200, $300, $400 million right in there. Thank you very much.
Well, we're very appreciative for Production Show Tech and the ability to bring this to the folks who attended, and for including us. And we thank you very much for the work you're doing.
Thank you. Y'all have a nice day.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.